Postal is also a church that's built on prayer. It's built on a movement of God and it's built on his favor. Like I tell people, we're a great church, but there's churches that do ministry better than we do. There's churches that kind of do scale better than we do. And I think we're just still got enough of that church planting mentality in us of we're kind of just begging God to move. And when he does, we're doing our best to keep up with that.
Hi, I'm James Forrest, and this is XP Leadership. If you're an executive pastor, you already know this is one of the most demanding and least visible roles in the church. Each episode, we hear from XPs across the country about what's actually working, navigating growth, managing pressure, leading teams, and staying healthy in the process. No fluff, just real conversations about life and leadership. Executive pastors rarely get the microphone, so this is where they do, and their perspective is too valuable to miss. Thanks for listening.
Dan, thank you, man, for making some time to hang out a little bit. I really have enjoyed getting to know you at a couple conferences over the years. I was impressed with some of the things you share with the group, so I wanted to take some time to get to know you a little bit better and also ask you a few questions about what you have going on professionally at the church. And I think it'll be actually really beneficial for other XPs or other folks that might want to listen across the country. So first, just tell a little bit about who you are and your personal professional background.
Yeah. I grew up in the Chicago area, so I'm in Atlanta now, describe myself as a recovering northerner. I don't know why I lived amongst snow and cold weather like I did, but still believe Chicago is probably one of the best cities in the country. Been married 20 years to my wife, Renee. We've got 4 kids from 8 up through 16, and they're awesome. They're a blast. We love to travel together, and I play taxi driver pretty much every day when I'm not working. But it's a blast. Professionally, I grew up in the local church, grew up at a great church, but it was the only church I knew. And the unique experience of that was it was a church that kind of at the end of every fiscal year would say, we need X amount of dollars to make this thing work. And so as God got a hold of my heart, it was, well, clearly if churches had more financial resources, they could reach more people. And that's just kind of what I thought because I didn't know any different. And so I said, well, I'm going to be a part of that solution. And so I went to undergrad, got a degree in business management and information technology, and said, I'll go kind of live out. I think it was John Wesley who said, make all you can, give all you can, save all you can. And I kind of set out to do that. And then I got connected at a church once we got married that was just high vision. And about 3 months in, I turned to my wife and I'm like, they don't ever ask for money. They just talk about what God's doing and say, hey, if you want to be a part of it, here's how you can be a part of it. And then they just discipled us in generosity. And I was really drawn to that. And what I realized was the larger gap in the local church is actually leadership, which shouldn't have surprised us. Jesus said it in Luke 10:2, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. But that captured my heart. And then I was a part of a church that desired to and operated with the excellence that I saw in the marketplace. And that was really cool to me. I'm like, churches should be the best run organizations. Yeah. Churches should operate with biblical, but also leadership principles at the foundation. And so that began a journey of me being called to ministry. And so I was in an MBA program. I withdrew. I went to seminary, started working at a church in Chicago, and then got here to 12Stone about 11 years ago. Got to serve as a campus pastor, launched a campus. The whole journey started portable, got it into a building. One of the highlights of anything I've been able to do, just boots on the ground, leading a campus, leading a church, and then got into multi-site, kind of multi-campus leadership. And then I've been the executive pastor here for about 5 years. And really that means I support our senior pastor and come alongside ministries, kind of central ministries, campuses, and then just kind of the creative and marketing expression of what we do. So that's kind of what it looks like. So it's a ton of fun. Yeah. And I got a great team that allows me to do that.
Thanks for sharing that, man. I love your passion around kind of business principles and business excellence and seeing that deployed in the church. I think we may have talked about this already, but in the lawyer seat, we get to see, call it a $30 million a year church compared to a $30 million a year nonprofit, or make up the number, whatever the number is. And inevitably that nonprofit or church is not as buttoned up on various things as the business sector. And it shouldn't be that way. So I love that. Love your focus on leadership development. How would you describe 12Stone's mission and culture to the world, to someone who doesn't know anything about your church?
Yeah. When I got introduced to 12Stone, people would share with me, 12Stone's a leadership development church, and we are, and I'll get to that. But as I kind of popped the hood and got underneath it, 12Stone's also a church that's built on prayer. It's built on a movement of God, and it's built on his favor. Like, I tell people, we're a great church, but there's churches that do ministry better than we do. There's churches that kind of do scale better than we do. And I think we're just still got enough of that church planting mentality in us of we're kind of just begging God to move. And when he does, we're doing our best to keep up with that. So if I were to take it past that piece to some others, we still very much have a blue collar work ethic to us. Like, even if I hire people at the lead team or executive level, I tell them, if you don't want to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty, this isn't the place for you. And that's not to say we don't understand how layered leadership and all of that works. But in the end, if something's got to be done, anyone on this team will do anything. And that really comes from our senior pastor. There's nothing he's unwilling to do. And so if he's willing to do anything, we're willing to do anything. So definitely a blue collar field. We're highly relational. We just love the people we work with. That's awesome because it's a ton of fun. It presents some challenges at times because you're trying to figure out what decision got made in a hallway instead of a meeting, just because we are relational. And then we're a leadership development culture. And that's really cool because 60% of our staff is 30 and under. And so we are just taking the next generation of leaders and we're investing in them. And some of us get to stay here 10, 20 years. Others we send off to churches all across the country. But that's really cool. And then over the last 10 years, we've become a very diverse and multicultural church, just as the demographics of our territory have changed. And so that's been a really cool journey as well.
Man, I love that. Broaden out beyond just you and the church. I know you have a lot of relationships with the executive pastors around the country. What are some of the top issues you think the capital C church might be dealing with in the States right now?
Yeah, the one I hear, especially amongst executive pastors, because we tend to live in this space a little bit more, is just that the challenges of staffing. And I think there's probably 2 to 3 primary reasons that staffing is a challenge. First is just the economic realities of the world we live in. So pressure on housing prices and wages and all of that kind of stuff has just made it complicated. So that's a piece. Second, for churches like 12Stone, there's a lot. I don't know the latest number, James. You might. There's probably 2,000 multi-site churches in America. I don't know. There's a lot,
As rare as it used to be.
And 15, 20 years ago, there was a handful of us. And so there's a lot more people fishing in that pond for staff. Second is just the reality of there were a lot of boomer pastors and they're getting to retirement age and there weren't enough pastors being trained, invested in, developed. And so that's just a shortage, not to mention, macro and economic type things. So I think that's a second one. And then a third is, it's one I don't talk about a lot, but I think it's just a reality is there's a lot of other organizations that now serve churches, whether creative agencies or things like that, and they can pay pastoral type staff at a higher level than churches can. And if churches can't get the resource on their own staff, then they're left having to employ those agencies to do it. So I see pros and cons to what I call the agency movement, but that is a reality that executive pastors are facing.
Yeah. It's interesting. All 3 that you highlighted there are all staffing and talent related in many ways, right? How do you leverage the staff that you have for the greatest outcome for the church? And, harder to find talent, harder to retain talent. And then how do you outsource around the edges for things that have to get done, but you might not have the employee base for one reason or another.
Right. And churches are just becoming more specialized. 20 years ago, most of your staff was pastoral in nature or a little bit more administrative in nature. Well, now I truly need a marketing team and I need a communications team and I need excellence in facilities and I need a higher level of IT. That fits into one of the other challenges of just churches trying to figure out what is the partnership between in-person ministry and digital ministry and how do those work together? And industry has gone ahead of us in that. And there's a ton that can be learned there. But there's also a lot that just has to be learned within the context of churches. And I think we're getting it figured out. But that's still one of the hot topics that XPs are always talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. What trends are you seeing? And we talked about a couple already, kind of within the large church world that maybe excite you on one hand, because there are plenty to choose from, and then maybe one that might concern you as some of these churches get large, multi-sites growing, more large churches now than there ever have been. What might be some of your concerns there?
Yeah, I'm not going to pick one that I'm fired up. I'm going to squeeze two in.
Okay, great.
Because I think they're somewhat related. I love what I'm hearing and seeing, yes, at 12Stone, but also at other churches as it relates to young adults and Gen Z, just their passion to be a part of the church, their passion to see the church move forward, their passion to be discipled and genuinely follow Jesus. That's really exciting. And we're seeing that on college campuses. There's just a lot there that I think churches are watching, churches are investing in, and wanting to see what's next. And I think that's just an openness to faith, which is really cool. 5 or 10 years ago, I would find that if I was on a baseball field or I was out in the community and people asked me what I did and I told them I was a pastor, they would kind of lean back a little bit. And what I've found over the last couple of years is when I tell people I'm a pastor, they lean in and they say, "Hey, tell me more about that." Or they say, "Hey, I've been wondering." And so I think that's really cool. Maybe, but I just love hearing those stories, because I used to try to see how long can I build a relationship with somebody before I have to tell them I'm a pastor. Because the moment I tell them I'm a pastor, I feel like I got a strike against me. And I think that's shifting a little bit, which is really cool. The second thing, James, and you and I have talked about this, I'm fired up about what is happening in church planting. That's something that God's given us favor in at 12Stone, but also across the US and across the globe. The most effective tool for reaching communities, whether here in the US or unreached people groups across the world, is planting churches. And so we're doubled down on that. We're fired up about it. What we're seeing in salvations, what we're seeing in stories of just healing and restoration and marriages and lives and addictions and all of that. Like, that's the thing where I'm trying to help our church. Like, when you're a pastor, you get how big of a deal it is for a church to get planted in San Diego, California. We're trying to figure out, how do we help our congregation here in the Atlanta area get as excited as we do. But a lot of really cool stuff happening in church planting, and we need that to move forward, because unfortunately a lot of churches are closing their doors.
So those are both fairly exciting things, right? Any concerns? Like concerns for larger churches? Like, what's the big risk for a larger church these days?
I think it all depends what life cycle you're in, but I think the risk for large churches is always, I'll just shoot you straight, it's the character and integrity of the people at the top. Nothing stops a movement of God, especially at a larger church, because they have to be a little bit more personality driven just by the nature of multi-site and all of that.
Right.
And man, nothing slows that and takes it out faster than just moral failures or unethical activity at the top. So that continues to have me concerned. It's why I love the accountability and the transparency that we have at 12Stone. I just believe anybody without accountability is a dangerous person. And so that's one. I'm watching what's happening with large denominations, and I'd love to see large denominations get their legs underneath them a little bit better again. And I don't know, I might make somebody mad by saying that, but I see more in the news about denominations getting stuck or making mistakes than about the progress they're making. And so I think that's a risk. And then the third one is I hope that large churches and multi-site churches never stop taking risks. The larger you are, the more you have, the more you can start to play it safe and play it cautious. But man, our communities need the local church to forcefully advance. And you can't if you're not willing to take risks. So I always encourage leaders and pastors, like, if you're not doing something that, when you're honest with God in the prayer closet, has you scared to death, you probably need to find something, because we're not just managing nonprofit organizations. We're stewarding the bride of Christ, and it needs to forcefully advance. Jesus said it to Peter, "I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail." So, yeah. All right. I got to be careful. I'll start preaching.
No, it's good, man. You don't read a lot of headlines about the lead pastor who's done it well last week, or done it well a month ago, or done it well for the last 10 years. and stayed faithful on all the fronts, right? And look, I mean, anytime an organization gets larger, whether you're talking about a for-profit or a nonprofit,
Right.
there's temptation to get a big head about it. The arrogance, the pride will rise, right? That's in all of us, right? There's a
Absolutely.
tendency to want to put the spotlight on us and not on the Lord. And so, but just because we're not seeing those headlines doesn't mean it's not there. And it does really matter, right? Because there's just such impact when the risk profile, the impact of good behavior or bad behavior is so much more in these large churches. It's something that, you do see a lot of headlines about the moral failures, right? And that's concerning for lots of reasons. And then the denomination point's interesting too. There is a lot of movement there. We're obviously living in more culturally divisive, politically divided. If you don't agree with me 100% on every single thing, then you're dead to me kind of a culture these days. And so, these denominations, particularly the large ones, there's people pulling on them in every different direction to go. And back to your earlier point about the focus of 12Stone, it's leadership, man. You gotta have leadership that can drive and navigate through those things in an environment that might be more challenging than it's been in a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, man, I know you're busy. How many people are on your staff? Remind me again about.
We're about 175 head count.
Yeah. So, how do you personally stay grounded and healthy in the midst of such, a demanding job and leadership position?
Yep. The first thing is, I think you just got to be honest about it. Like, I'll just tell you, James, I'm not great at it, but I don't claim to be great at it. And I think the danger is, leadership self-deception to tell yourself the story. No, I'm doing a great job at this. I tend to get out of balance more than I should. And so I acknowledge it. Hey, I'm not great, but I never give up on working at it. And I think that's what has allowed me to be on the journey. I don't think I've, one of the words that's out there, and whether it's a buzzword or not, it's a word that's out there, is the burnout thought. And I don't think I've ever been close to burnout, because I acknowledge, I have not done this well, and I got to go set some things, and I gotta go fix some things. But I really think three things has allowed me to stay reasonably grounded and reasonably healthy. The first one is, I've never actually tried to chase balance, because I think balance is a myth. And the best example I can give of that, people talk about work-life balance. If we're going to do work-life balance, that means we never get to go on vacation. Because what is vacation? I go all the way over here, and I sleep in, and I eat too much, and I sit on the beach, and I do that whole thing. There's not a lot of work involved in that, right? But then on the flip side, man, there's just some weeks where things happen. You're launching a campus, you're hiring some staff, you're navigating a crisis, whatever it may be. You can't just say it's 5 o'clock, turn the computer off, and go home. And so to say balance can be achieved, I think is a futile pursuit. You're just chasing something that never happens. I think what you're actually trying to do is find a rhythm, and I might swing over here for a bit, and I'm on vacation. I was on vacation last week, James. It was awesome. And, I worked as little as possible. Well, that's one swing of the pendulum. Then on the other side is crisis, or the week of Christmas or Easter for us in ministry. Well, that's another end of the pendulum. And I'm just trying to make sure that the pendulum swings back and forth enough that in some ways I'm over center a little bit. But I'm not trying to just live right at center. That's impossible. So that's one thing early on that just helped me. Stop trying to pursue balance. Try to make sure that the pendulum swings appropriately. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we call it irreducible minimums here. And it's figuring out what are the things in your life that, even if everything else gets jacked up, keeps you healthy enough that you can keep moving forward. So I'll give a couple examples of mine. One of mine is, it's my goal to work out 5 days a week. My irreducible minimum is, even if it's a 10-minute workout, I'm getting to the gym 3 days a week, because the physical exercise, it does something for me. So that's one. Another one is, my wife and I try to, at least every other night, sit on the couch and just have a conversation, not watching Netflix or, sitting at a kid's sports game or whatever, but like, just shut it off, sit on the couch, talk. And sometimes that's 10 minutes, sometimes that's an hour, but we try to do that every other night. And, a lot of things can be not working, but if that's working, I'm in pretty good shape. And then the third one is, I take Fridays off, and my measurement of that is, if I work a Friday because I didn't lead my Saturday to Thursday well, like I just have things unfinished, that's on me, and that's me not serving my family well. If something happens on a Friday and I got to deal with it, well, that's life, and I'll go deal with it. So my rule of thumb is I never work a Friday as long as I can control it. And that kind of keeps me grounded and kind of keeps the pendulum in line there. And then the third one is I'm just blessed that I married well. My wife is incredibly supportive. And there's just no way around that. Like, stuff happens and she'll go, I got it. And she takes care of family stuff if I'm having to take care of something here. And then I try to swing the pendulum back. And so between those three things, I think that's what keeps it working.
Yeah, man, that's really helpful. I'm sure for other people to hear. What I love about it is that it's not, hey, never ever do this or always do this. It's a fairly healthy, I think, mature, you know, to be as young as you are. We're going to hold some things in tension because life is not
Correct.
static. Life is dynamic.
It is not. Yep.
I love the thing with your wife sitting down every other day. I mean, what I love about that, it's not every night, right? Because that might be a little unrealistic and then you're going to fail at it. And it's not, we never sit down. It's like every other night and it's going to be 10 minutes or an hour, but just that intentionality with her, kind of keeping God first, your spouse second, kids third,
Yep.
Work, and then keeping all that in balance. I think it's really helpful and needed, man. And, I come from an industry where workaholism is a big thing, right? Lawyers tend to overwork and burn out. We have a high depression rate, high suicide rate. And then if you take that dynamic and then you compare it to like ministry, which may be a little different, but in some ways it's not, I would argue that like the spirituality dynamic of ministry can actually push people even further. It's like, not only am I working for dollars, but I'm working for the Lord. So of course I'm going to work that extra hour, or 10 hours or 15 hours or what it might be. So having those checks and balances in place for you, kind of leading by example for your staff is just really meaningful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So last question, unless you got anything else you want to add, what advice would you give to a younger pastor, although yourself are very young, like I mentioned, but someone who's kind of maybe moving into a role at a church that's growing? Maybe they've gone from 1 million to 3 million or 5 million or 10 million, whatever it is, but they're at a new level of leadership, right? They've got a lot of people reporting to them. They kind of can't believe they got there. Like, what do I do next? What would be like some main things that you would say to that person?
Yep. And some of this is what people have done for me, and other is just experiences I've had here. I think the first thing you got to do is just relax. Um, and back to what I said earlier, Jesus said to Peter, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. And sometimes as pastors, we can have this messianic complex, right? Like we think we're the solution, and that comes in direct pastoral things. Someone's marriage is in crisis. It's like, well, Dan, am not the solution. We all know Jesus at the center of their life and at the center of their marriage is the solution. We can do the same thing in our leadership too. And we just have to remember that God is building his church. And so I sometimes just have to just relax. And part of that is I had to learn in ministry because I'm like, I'm doing this for God. And you've got this like performance mentality. And, you almost think if you make a mistake in ministry, it's sinful because it's ministry, right? It's like, no, it's just a mistake. Just because it's a mistake. Yeah. And so I had to learn that very little sinks the ship. And whether it's the first ministry initiative that didn't work or the first staff member that screwed up or whatever, very little sinks the ship. And so I make sure to protect the things that can put a big hole in the boat. And we talked about a few of those, but character type things, getting out ahead of your skis on your finances, right? Like those are the things that can take you out for years. Outside of that, you've got time to fix the small holes. And, a boat can very much stay afloat with a couple small leaks in it. And I've kind of just settled, at 100, someone told me once you're past 100 staff members, you will always have a staffing issue, whether a performance issue or a moral failure, or you're just short 3 staff or whatever. So we just always do. I think I have 3 of them right now. Yeah. And so that's okay. That's how it works. And I think too many leaders think, man, if I get in the right cohort and I have a mentor I meet with once a year, I can get where I want to go. And I just encourage people, get a coach, get them fast. The way you have a good coach is if you don't pay them, would you be willing to pay them? If you do pay them, are you paying them well? And I used to joke, there's 2 people you always want to make sure you pay well. It's your attorney and your CPA because they keep you out of jail or hot water. But the third one is, I think you pay a great coach because they ultimately help you get where you want to go. An attorney and a CPA is going to make sure you don't get derailed on the way there. But ultimately, a coach is going to help pace the way and help you get there. So I encourage everybody, if you don't have a coach, you need one.
And so I appreciate you saying that. I remember the first time I heard you talk at a conference, I was like, man, that guy, smart, headed places. I want to spend some time with him. So thanks for agreeing to do this.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Awesome. Have a great day.
You too. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening. I'm extremely grateful for executive pastors that love the church. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, encouraged you, challenged you, or reminded you that you're not alone in this role, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or share this with another executive pastor or leader who came to mind while you were listening. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every listen, share, subscription, and comment helps build stronger executive pastors and moves the church forward.